we're going to start the other caddy, then we'll go down the line. Again, I'll ask the question, and they'll have 4 minutes to answer. Hattie, as you know, the next council will handle, several rezonings. Central Square, North Mass Ave, and Cambridge Street from Michier to Inman. You stated in your questionnaire that the Cambridge Street and North Mass Ave proposals, you stated that in the Cambridge Street and North Mass Ave proposal, you believe that heights above 6 stories should require setbacks. Can you explain your rationale for that and whether it is a worthy trade-off if it ends up limiting housing supply in those corridors, which you also said is beneficial?
So this may be a short answer because I probably misspoke, but am I like step backs, just like 5 feet at the 6-story level, could that dramatically change the streetscape? It's really that urban design. And whether it's at 6 stories or 8 stories, if you just go down NASDAQ, a building even 18 stories looks way different just with 5 feet back the 6-story level, which means the people in the city would be more being able to hide heights. Does that?
Yep. Great. Thank you.
You use setbacks. Is this okay? Can you hear me now? No. Right now, is that sound?
Oh, it's slow.
I'll practically eat it.
You walk through these straights and turns, but so how much time?
It's okay. Okay, so you also said in your questionnaire that you may be open to supporting the state bill limiting some rent increases, but that you were concerned about some unintended consequences. Can you elaborate on what you anticipate might be some of the unintended consequences of limiting rent increases and how we might still be able to implement affordable housing policies while overcoming these unintended consequences?
So it's this question of whether it's rent control or rent stabilization, because rent control is not, in my view, does not have a record necessarily doing what we want just to provide more affordable housing. It sometimes helps a very small number of people and defeats more identification. But rent stabilization is a different category. So that's why then I wasn't sure what the time was. And the unintended consequences may be what we saw sometimes in Ingrid, which is people who didn't need the affordable housing getting the affordable housing, and also a disinvestment in the infrastructure, which led to unintended consequences that we would like. Is that
yeah.
Sure.
And the other thing is, whatever we do, we don't want an owner's bureaucracy that ends up taking a lot of money or costing a lot of money in order to.
Sure. 2 minutes.
All right.
On purpose.
I was not expecting this. So one other statement in your response, you stated that's what's missing. What is missing all the talk about housing affordability in Cambridge is the need for better paying jobs. Absolutely. If people made adequate income, they could afford housing costs. Can you explain how you would tackle this under the powers of the CELs?
Well, that is an issue. I mean, the city council can affect the housing for the whole region, which we all talk about. What we can do and what the state can do is do a much more intentional job of effective job training. We know that is how people do a lot of poverty. That is how people get access to other jobs. So when I say you look at it, housing affordability, everyone had an income that could afford the housing in Cambridge, you literally wouldn't have prices. Oh, that sounds kind of cliche. It's actually a deep understanding of the economic inequality in our society that has led to the situation our housing in Cambridge is unaffordable to people because we have this skewing of folks making $20,000 a year and then people making $500,000 a year. There just shouldn't be so many billionaires and millionaires able to do what they do without a living wage for the, is that, I mean, I truly believe that. So you asked what the Cambridge City Council would do. I think we can really assess and look at all of our job training programs and do a much more comprehensive look at how effective they are and what else did you do. And we have a jobs training, which I know that councils look at to have a linkage be specifically dedicated to job training. And that's kind of thing that you really seeking in order to put more resources into that in order to uplift a lot of poverty instead of concentrating on poverty on a base body. Only deeply subsidized home from that. Great. You do better. Okay. Is that it? You got a minute. Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, okay, then I'll ask you a general question. Well, I don't know, just curious, given that the multiple rezonings that will be above before the council in the next term, generally, how would you approach your thinking on new rezonings?
Burhan Azeem Berry School. I really look to the city and all of us to look at how it is that we can use that rezoning to produce the kind of housing we want. I think one of the issues with the multi-county zoning, which I did both for, and it was a compromise that, again, I'm grateful my colleagues worked on, but it's not ideal. And part of that is because what people recognize, you go along NASA Ave, it shouldn't be any place where there's a single-story building. Because if we just built those up to even just 6 stories, we keep planning so much more housing. And that's how I'd be looking to assess these rezonings. I think it's a really great idea to have the squares and the quarters at this differential. Now, over is that 36? So what's the return? So then I'll just say, because I know this graph, I'm not sure. I mean, it's all on Muzzy. The AHO was one of those really challenging ones. A really great question on yours thing was, well, would you do anything different? What I did on the AHO was propose 3 changes. 1, to follow our sustainability goals. The climate crisis is the existential crisis of our generation. Nothing else matters. Affordable housing, economic equality, you can don't address that. I asked for that to be included. And middle income 20%, and neither of those were included in that, unfortunately, yet. Now we're all talking about that.
Hi, Ned. In your questionnaire, you talked about the moral obligation to build more housing in which to fight climate change. Can you tell us more about why building housing in Cambridge is important for climate change?
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. So, in that you did just struck on this a little bit, but I think I would change a little bit what you said. So, I think housing and building dense transit-oriented housing is a first-order issue in solving the climate crisis. Plastic or wood straws or whatever, that's not going to solve the climate crisis. Even how we address our energy mix is, in my opinion, not quite as important as whether we're able to build transit-oriented housing, live densely in the places where the jobs are, where people want to be. And that's simply because a lot of emissions come from transportation, automobile transportation, logistics. The suburban experience, as we know, has failed in spreading out our population and relying on large automobiles and large trucks, move all our goods, move all our people to get people to work. That's resulted in tons and tons of carbon emissions that this led to climate crisis as we see today. So the only way to really get around that is to build densely around transit so people don't need to rely on automobiles and carbon-based transportation. We need to be able to rely on sustainable transportation, sustainable logistics, walking, and there's so many knock-on health effects. I don't hear mention the public health effects. Well, the healthiest thing that you can do for yourself right now is to live in a walk city. You look at, someone who lives in Cambridge or somebody who lives out in the suburbs, and the health effects are amazing. It's just walking around will save your life rather than, all these miracle drugs that we develop here at Cambridge. So it really is a moral obligation to build more housing in Cambridge, because if we don't build housing in Cambridge, that means it gets built somewhere else. And where is somewhere else? Somewhere else is, I don't know, maybe Texas. Maybe it's, a suburban development in Texas. I could go on a rant about that because unlike people looked at the census data, but the blue states are losing seats. And the federal government is going to be red for a really long time. Blue states don't start built. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but, I guess it ties into the moral obligation because, those folks in federal government right now are too solving the climate crisis. So it really is a multi-dimensional problem. But it all starts with building densely around transit in places like Central Square or Square Dozen.
Thanks. I was curious, in your questionnaire, you mentioned Chicago's Green Social Housing Ordinance. Can you tell us exactly what that is and why you think it would be a good idea for Cambridge to do something similar, how it would do with Vernier?
Yeah, definitely. And I won't pretend to be an expert on this, but I have researched it a little bit. Essentially, it's a social housing revolving fund of sorts. And I'll try not to get too specific, so I'll probably mess something up. But essentially, at its core, it's the city funding public housing, whether that's true public housing, like a public housing project that's entirely city-owned, or it's something more like subsidized inclusionary zoning, where the city is paying for the affordable units within a market-rate building. The city of Chicago, other cities in Montgomery County, Maryland has done this. Other cities around the country, other cities around the world, like Austria, have some form of social housing or funded affordable development in their city. And basically, they care some sustainability requirements too around building, passive house or other environmental friendly building regulations. But they're using public funds to pay for those affordable units, which I think is really important to me because we did beg and plead the market to build affordable units. But, my own experience in my life is that The market's just going to do what the market's going to do. So if you want affordable units, we have to build them. We have to fund them. But at the end of the day, it's just another tool to toolkit. It's not going to be the one thing that solves the housing prices. It's going to be one of many. We can't just try to rely on social housing or this sort of revolving fund, but it is a really good tool.
Thank you.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. So in your questionnaire, you've talked about your challenges as a renter and your intro as well, renter in Cambridge. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and how, that impacted your platform and how your proposals would address some of the challenges that you and other renters have faced?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier in my intro, I've actually moved around a lot in Cambridge. And in that way, I've been a nomad my entire life. I have moved at least 5 times over the 7 years that I've lived here. It's either connected to rising rents or bad landlords or both. In fact, last year, my landlord did not provide heating. My landlord did not provide cooling. And I was at a point where I had to push and advocate for myself, and our tenants within our complex actually came together to strategize how we can actually advocate for ourselves because we weren't living in habitable conditions. My story is not a unique story. There are other people who are living in situations where they feel like they are not heard and their landlords are taking advantage of that. So part of what I would want to do on City Council is bring in more proposals to advance tenant protections. Whether that's pushing our municipal voucher program that we just started recently while advocating against the closure of a homeless shelter. Yeah, that's right. We closed the homeless shelter, which is another part of our platform on our campaign, is to open a new one. And the second is also bringing in an emergency rental assistance programs for any renters facing evictions or need support with moving in and moving out, especially with condo conversions, which we need to strengthen as well. We need a move in and move out guide into how to introduce yourself to the city. And also when you're on your way out, when your time has come and you feel like exploring another city. Because the reality is Cambridge is not just homeowners. There is a transit community here that we have to be able to advocate for. And a unique part about our campaign is, and that kind of talked about this, that I want to take it a step further, because let's paint the picture of where we've been in Cambridge on housing. Over the past 20 years, we have built over 10,000 units in Cambridge. That's incredible. We've also made progress on things like the affordable housing overlay. We've also recently ended exclusionary zoning and passed the multifamily zoning reform. We also have the ALY quadrangle rezoning. So our city is making progress on zoning. But the strange part about it is that rents are still increasing. I just moved 2 weeks ago and I'm a city council candidate. It was brutal. And our campaign believes centrally that trickle-down economics may work in the short term, but definitely not in the long term. So our campaign wants to bridge a new lane when we talk about the housing crisis, because we cannot continue to solely lean on the same forces that brought us in this housing crisis in the first place. And that includes restricting biotech expansions and hotel expansions. But most importantly, we need to center communities of color. In our city, we have had a Riverside community get pushed out and gentrified by Harvard as an institution. And we know that to be the case in Austin as well. We've seen Kendall Square impact the court community as well. So by centering communities of color, we can bring in an innovative solution that actually uplifts everybody. And Ned kind of spoke to it, but I'm going to push it further and say it's social housing. And the idea behind social housing and why it's actually such a good idea is that it takes our AAA bond rating, which, by the way, we're one of very few cities in the United States that has this. It brings it and utilizes it to build housing that not only builds deeply affordable housing, but also low-income, middle-income housing, and market-rate housing. So it brings in all forms of housing and helps people not only keep their roots in this community, but also build roots in this community if they want to stay here longer. The other pieces are on rent control, and I hope to work with ABC if I'm elected. And then I'd probably leave the last at building a new homeless shelter, because we do need as other non-congregate shelter that offers medicine and food to unhoused.
There you go, Kenny. So do you give longer answer, or do you only have to have one question? Hi, Zai. I know where you're doing that. Good. In your responses, you stated that one way to strike a balance between preserving Cambridge's people and its historical buildings would be to create more incentives for historic homes to be converted into co-ops, giving residents budget ownership and stability. Could you please expand on that proposal? How would it be funded and scaled to meet the housing needs in a high-demand city like Cambridge?
Yeah, so when it comes to living with people, I went to school at Cornell. We have lots of books. We also have Greek life, so groups that have housing. Overall, people just seem to really like living amongst each other. I think that it's something that a lot of times zoning regulations or requirements on housing can actually decrease that. When I was in school, we had a shared kitchen. We absolutely loved being able to do that for the social component. I think that's really important, especially for young people, to be able to connect with other people. There's a social crisis going on where a lot of people are saying that they don't have friends. And that's happening for a lot of people in that 20 to 30 age category, and people that are also aging that happen to cross the spectrum. So I think that it would be really beneficial for the city and its residents if we had systems in place where individuals have wanted to start nonprofit that would allow a co-op like situation where the city could provide funding. Like you mentioned, we have a AAA rating. I think that's really good to be able to utilize that towards making it so that we have lower interest rates in those sort of organizations to kind of put down roots in Cambridge.
Great. Also in your questionnaire, you wrote that you supported leveraging the city's bond rating to secure loans so that nonprofits can build 100% affordable housing, but you also stated that the only type of housing you support are ADUs and triple deckers in order to maintain neighborhood character. If affordable housing nonprofits can only build up to 3 units at a time, which would be less cost effective for them, they may stop working here altogether. Is that a trade-off you would like acceptable?
So I would say that was a mischaracterization of what I said. What I was saying is that I would support that by right. So when it comes to residential properties, if you're taking out a loan, a residential property is considered 1 to 4 units. And I think that having by right development for those type of units makes sense. When we pulled a multifamily zoning, when we took away a lot of the requirements, a lot of the oversight in the planning board, we need to make sure that we're really having proper oversight for big apartment developments. So it's not that I only support developments that are 3 stories and 4 units. It's that if we're going to do it by right, you not consider issues like if there are green roof, but is that going to cut down every tree in Cambridge? Because green roofs are great, but they don't really work for bunnies or for bees, right? Is there 6 stories up? So we want to make sure that we're creating the system where the by right component is limited to actual residential properties and that commercial properties have proper oversight.
Would that apply to affordable housing, or do you support the current affordable housing over it?
So when it comes to affordable housing, I'm much more, I'm willing to go higher than I would be by right for a commercial property. I do think that it's regional dependent. I think that what is great about Cambridge is different neighborhoods. Every neighborhood has a different charm to it. And then we want it sensitive towards the neighborhood. So I don't think zoning by the citywide as whole is ever a good option. That said, when it comes to affordable housing, I definitely do support a higher by right standard than I would market rate.
All right, thank you. In your view, how does Cambridge balance the trade-off between historic preservation and the need to build our homes?
Perfect question. When it comes to building homes, I think we have to consider the environment. We're incentivizing destroying existing buildings to build higher. Yes, it's great from a transit perspective, but as someone who's been on construction sites, I can tell you not economic building is not great for the environment. There's a lot of emissions that happen. There's a ton of weapon that goes on. The average person probably hasn't spent a lot of time on the construction site. There might be a couple of contractors out there that have a lot more time than me. But generally speaking, people don't really see those effects. So when it comes to buildings, there's a lot of buildings that are large existing buildings that could be built on the back. We could take areas that have a backyard, be able to build an extra couple of units, and also dividing some of the big homes. So there's people that have big homes that want to be able to divide it into 2 or 3 different units so that they can have their children or grandchildren live there, or have their parent come in, but allow them to still have some independence in their own unit. So I support zoning like that. Those are the part of multi-family zoning that I do support. There's parts that I do support, but it's really the stuff that focuses on yield residential properties, not the sizing commercial properties as multi-family residential developments.
All right, thank you, Ben.
Can I take 12 seconds to say I also am very against bringing down the 20% down? I've heard multiple people talk about how market rate, we want to reduce that percentage. I think that's the only thing that we actually gain from the multi-family overlay. So I think that, so I think that's really important that Nikita.
Thank you. Hi, Peter. How are you? Good. How are you? Great. In your response to the questionnaire, you stated that we can and should prioritize impact residents in certain occasions like tutors, nurses, firefighters, social workers, case managers, police veterans, etc., for inclusionary housing units. Given the constraints like decreasing federal dollars, as well as fair housing law and more, how would you determine which occupations would qualify and craft a legal city program to achieve this goal?
I think that's gonna be a very complicated answer. I think every occupation is ruled for liberties. I mean, the occupation is local. And so, in order to come up with the list of what we kind of recommend in terms of the occupations that we would prioritize, I think that's gonna be a group discussion. That's gonna be that's gonna be involving all the citizens or chance of riches on this. I think the bottom line is we know that we keep having a housing crisis for every single election term, like for every Cambridge City Council election. We talked about housing crisis and stuff, and we built a lot as a city. I think we've done a great job as a city to be very frank. And the bottom line is it's still not enough. And the bottom line is I wish I had a magic pill, but the bottom line is no matter what we do, or even to the best we do, we're probably not going to be able to satisfy all the house. And so then the question becomes, how do we prioritize what we need to do? A similar kind of example, or that I give to voters would be, I'm a physician. I have 24 hours of my life, and I know you guys have 24 hours of your life too. But when I'm on duty, and there are, say, if I need to spend an hour on a patient, and there are more patients than I can see in the shift, I have to prioritize. I have to say who probably will die first. That's not necessarily the push, but I have to take care of those folks first. And sort of with the occupation theme over here, or cancer bridges a burst, is that I would love to have everyone else. I would love to trust. I just don't think that's gonna be feasible. So how does our city prioritize who and what kind of occupations and all those kind of stuff? I think that's gonna be a group discussion.
Thank you. What do you think are important aspects to consider when defining the cutoff for historic housing? You mentioned in your questionnaire response homes built up to 1950 or the 1950s. Are there other factors that you would consider when defining what is historic?
I think the bottom line of that is that that is also going to be something that we are going to talk to experts and professionals in terms of defining historic, because there is similar to medicine in life. We want to achieve some kind of balance, and the balance is more housing, neighborhood preservation, and so I think the balance to and how do we make Cambridge better in terms of housing. So in terms of years of cutoff for historic buildings, I personally, it's probably going to be the range between 75 to 100 years in terms of buildings. But what exactly that cutoff is, I think that has to kind of take a look at the city's needs in terms of how many housings are we trying to project to build, along with different neighborhoods, and then also developers to be here.
Given the multiple rezonings that will be before the council by the next term, this council or how you will approach that each one in the France council. What are the priorities that you would use to approach those rezonings?
In general, I favor building big and tall along the main arteries of Cambridge, and then in terms of different neighborhoods, I do think that we should respect every neighborhood's kind of input. How we do that, I think is that we should have some kind of review board for those neighborhoods. And the bottom line is not to curtail the amount of buildings that we could do. Is to, if we build tall and big in certain neighborhoods, that's probably going to block the solar panels on the neighboring houses. And And it also has the potential to cut down the excessive trees, especially the big ones. Those all have public health effects. And well, what I can say is, on the last 30 seconds, is that public health is really the main focus. All right, thank you very much.
Dude. Ayesha.
Yeah, well, how are you?
Great. So in your questionnaire response, you stated that you're not 100% sure yet on
the placement of the farm in investment of farm fix anxiety.
Sorry to that. All right.
Thank you. It's an extra capture me. I should make it for
Sorry again, your candidate, in your response to the questionnaire, the ABC, you say that they're not 100% sure yet on how you would like to see Central Square rezoned and would need more information. Can you explain the type of information you would need to determine whether each stories on Mass Ave and each stories in the surrounding area would be acceptable?
Yes, thank you for the question. And, I would say there was quite a few community conversations when the Massonet building was created. Not everyone was excited in the community. I attended quite a bit of those meetings. And, I want to appreciate the community input that we had across the city. And I also want to name that I'm not afraid of heights, right? Like, I moved in Jefferson Park, right next door to Bridge Towers, where a lot of my friends live. I spent many days and even nights with them. So again, I'm not afraid of height, but what I am worrying about is not investing in community input and really thinking about how we engage our public around these conversations. So a couple of neighborhood groups and organizations put together sometime last year to discuss this, to really talk about what would this look like and how to be kept together around the rezoning of Central Square, making sure that having input. And overwhelmingly, there wasn't a lot of happiness when it came to this tall, 18-story building across Central Square. Now, we know Central Square can hold them, like it happen, but we also want to make sure that we're bringing our community along in the conversation. So really think about what does that look like. Not every parking lot should go up to 18 stories unless it's 100% affordable housing. Making sure that we're not reducing our inclusionary, so that we're also maximizing on 20%, if not greater. I know that might be difficult to get to, but I would love to see us get greater engineering number hop beyond the 20%. But also, even what folks talk about is the social housing. Should also maximize on more affordability there and making sure that more folks across socioeconomic assets are able to live together in builds and create community within each other. So last thing I'm not 100% sure is because our community is not efficient. While I value and believe that height is important, I also value our community input and that is pretty important in terms of how do you keep forward with the future of such a square as well as all.
Thank you. I want to follow up on the social housing keys. I know a few candidates asked it. But you're the one who have a low part time up right now. How does Cambridge pay for? Cambridge is a wealthy city relative to most others, but these difficult times, federal funding. How do we pay for that or other social program?
This is a great question and one that we have to continue to challenge ourselves with in terms of how we're prioritizing where our dollars are going. We can't do everything in this wealthy city because dollars are tight. However, what you talk about and then people talk about this in introduction around the quality of life, the public health crisis. When you have a home, your roof over your head, the extra things that you're able to do with your might are feasible. Thinking capping. Your quality of just how do you show up to go to school? How do you go to work? The food that you have on your table. When you have a roof on your head, things help a hustle. And we want to make sure that we are dating and will the town to the top of our city because we want the possibilities to be here for our neighbors, for our future neighbors of Cambridge, because that is what social housing should look like. And that is truly what Cambridge is. Cambridge is about community, but oftentimes there are decisions that are being made that are not often intrusive of the community. And that's where we are finding that disconnect. And that's where more and more voices are being left upright, which is a disservice to public service. And that's why I vow on making sure that we are inclusive of our community
make sure the input is there. And when I often speak, I'm talking about our 6th grader to adore projects on housing, up to our elders who are worrying about aging and
In your questionnaire, that's not easy.
I was serious. I'm glad you changed the picture. If I'd work hard to get down to 2 chins, so classy. Better thing.
In your questionnaires, you mentioned building housing on city-owned lots to Central Square. That possibility has been on the table for some time now, possibly every term you've been on the council. What has to happen to get shovels in the ground building that housing in the next terms?
Yeah, it's great. That's a great question, and it has been something we've been talking about for quite a few years. I think right now there are RFPs that are out there looking at asking developers to put proposals on what they would do on those sites. There's obviously a lot of conversation about are they going to mix income sites or 20% inclusionary, or would they be fully affordable sites? My preference would be that they be fully affordable sites. The challenges with that is that some of the funding is different, right? And so if Justice Star, for example, said we could do a 5-story building and build 40 units of 100% affordable, but then a private developer at 20% could build 70 units of affordable, then you have this question of, would you rather the fewer units because it's a nonprofit, or would you take the 30 additional units and be willing to work with the for-profit developer? And so those are conversations that we have to have. We have talked about the social housing. I just want to say, and I have had some discussion, and I've been working in the Housing Justice Coalition to have a policy order that's ready to go on starting the process of having the city really take a look at social housing and what would it take to go down that road. We really require calling out the money and using our AAA bond rating to our advantage for that. So again, to get shovels in the ground, we need to get these proposals in. We need to make some decisions, or need to make zoning changes. And I support the conversation around community input. I also know that sometimes in Cambridge, it take a very long time, and so at some point, you have to make a decision, right? And so I live in Central Square. I see Mass and May, every day. I still think it's a much better building than what was there before, and it houses a whole lot of people, including a whole lot of low-income people. And so, Ned brought up the impact on the environment by building more density. It's also better for small businesses, right? Bullets Cleaners, my dry cleaner around the corner. Forget driving it from another community, though, Kim. No one's coming from North Cambridge to go, right? But another 1,000+ people living in Central Square, many of whom need dry cleaning. He's the only dry cleaner in the neighborhood. He's going to do well, right? More people buying pizzas, more people going out to the restaurants, right? This is good. Density works in a whole lot of different ways, and I understand, about the neighborhood characteristics, but we also have to understand why that happened, right? And the history of zoning in this country, and in this city, is not always something that we should be terribly proud of. If certain neighborhoods were deemed as desirable, certain neighborhoods were deemed as not desirable, the not desirable neighborhoods were the ones closest to the industry and closest to the factories. That's where most of the density went. Not all, but a lot of it went. And that's what is called exclusionary zone. So, yes, we have to be respectful, but you're too small a city to say certain neighborhoods are going to be protected from building more houses. We'll never reach our goals.
30 seconds. Okay, I'm lost.
I'm a time for boys. Elect one Central Square resident. How do you approach the proposed rezoning in Central Square?
Will you support up to 18 stories in the square and 8 stories in the surrounding area?
Yes.
All right. We're going to go to the next round. We'll have to give a round of applause to... So I'll start with you again, as Dennis Love. You stated in your questionnaire response that striking the right balance between preserving Cambridge's people, you state that regarding striking the right balance between preserving Cambridge's people and its historical buildings, how will private development not displace folks earning 50% AMI? To clarify, are you stating that this is a criteria that the Historical Commission should consider, and are they the right body to make that determination?
Thank you for the question. I think the vote is definitely out of context, though. So that was a response to a question that was asked about whether I would make all the historical commission decisions fairly advisory. So that's what that was in response to. And what I said was, no, we can't simply have all historical commission decisions, especially when there are already court buildings. There might be neighborhoods that the historical commission wants to preserve. We can't. I'm not just going to blanketly say that we should ignore their judgments on that. So that was a response to. Obviously, we here at Cambridge have some of the oldest and most pigmented history in this country. I don't believe that it's in anyone's interest to tear it up. I also don't think we have to tear it up in order to build more housing. So I think that this is really a question of how much are we going to plan for housing. I think this is one of the reasons why I prefer public alternatives to building housing, things like social housing, community land trusts, because these mechanisms allow for us to be able to pick and choose precisely where housing might go that makes more sense, and make sure that housing is actually permanently affordable and isn't just destroying historical landmarks and then ultimately going to be market rate limits.
Thank you. In your answer to the question about Cambridge Street and North Mass Ave zoning proposals, you stated that we need to make sure the zoning encourages considerable affordable housing. Given that the AHO is already on the books, what else would you do to encourage considerable affordable housing in usually buildings?
Well, I think there's a lot of conversation about moving the inclusionary percentage 20%, 10%, or down to 0. I am very much against that. I think one of the reasons that we struck the deal that we did back in February is the fact that this is going to add affordable units to our city. And to now go back on that promise feels like a little bit of a stab in the back. And as I said in my introduction, we are not talking about the folks below 50% AMI. Even these questions have nothing to do with folks below 50% AMI, right? And so it's amazing how these folks just are invisible in this conversation and where they're going to be able to find their housing. So that's where I would prefer. I would prefer deeply affordable housing. And I'm not sure that the inclusionary units are going to be able to provide that, certainly not as they're structured now. Social housing would, potentially. Community land trusts could, potentially. The housing vouchers that we advocated that the city council pass, and that it did this spring, they could potentially if we expand those programs. But that's only going to happen if we're having a realistic conversation about income inequality of the city, and I think that collectively we're really allergic to that conversation.
How do you pay for that?
Taxes. You have the lowest residential tax rate of any city in the area by a mile, and everybody's feel free to say it. People literally won't even touch the subject. And many of the candidates, including folks on this stage, have told me that even while they, might agree with the fact that we have to raise taxes, they don't think it's a winning political issue. And I think that as a progressive city and as a room of mostly progressive votes, I assume, people will understand that in order to be able to help people at the bottom of the income ladder, in order to be able to provide social services, the wealthy should be able to pay their fair share. And I think that applies to Cambridge as it does federally, and someone needs to have the courage and this thing in mind. City Council of the Ayah. Go ahead, say. Oh, any more questions, sir? I can also grab.
Well, review how does Cambridge balance the trade-off between historic preservation and building more housing? You started to address it, but
yeah, I think I think the power of the historical commissions as they're currently operating is perfectly fine. I don't have an issue with it. Of course, there are times when historical commissions are used, I think, to slow down projects. I understand that. I think part of that is also because there hasn't really been a lot of socializing of the idea of zoning in areas where there's a credible opposition to it. And as a result, you have this opposition manifesting itself in, all these mechanisms to block housing. I actually think that had there been a little bit more of an honest conversation about what inclusionary units are supposed to build, they're not going to build deeply affordable housing. They're going to build housing for upper middle class people like Nyan is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Hey, Burhan. You wrote a response to the ABC questionnaire that you worry that 8 stories on Cambridge Street would be a dead zone for development. Can you explain your rationale in what you believe would be feasible there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so much about the zoning adjustments, right? And I think something that we made, in that conversation that sometimes you have flawed is like, how did you come to say stones, right? And it was a mix of both the politics and the practical piece of it, right? We tried at Cambridge to do a smaller zoning called the Missing Middle Petition, which was 3 stories at first, right? And everyone would say going smaller is more popular. You die, right? And it died partially because at that smaller scale, you don't get the efficiency of scale to get the inclusionary, right? Like that was 3 units, our inclusionary starts at 10, and you really need a lot of surplus before you make inclusionary pencil. And if you go higher than 6, you start getting higher per unit cost because you go to a different construction, right? Not exclusively, but by and large, that's what happened. And so, I think 6 is a great number. You're seeing a lot of prices that are at 6 for exactly this reason. It's a sweet spot in terms of per unit economics. And once you go to 8, it's kind of like a dead zone. You don't see that many projects penciled. And so I think it would be better to find numbers that, are going to deliver what people are expecting. It would be really sad to have a hard and awkward conversation about 8 stories, but then not get 8 stories and, that you feel like you disappointed the advocates who supported it, but also scared neighbors without actually delivering, that at the end of the day.
Another statement in your response was that you would try and make inclusionary zoning not indoor housing production by paying for it through tax abatement. Can you explain how that would work and be implemented?
Yeah, so I think that there's been a lot of fear about inclusionary zoning, right? I would say that we did have this conversation, which was started by 2 other councilors, Councilor Toner and Councilor Nolan, in terms of the city, with Truth and Alsor. And their idea was to reduce the 20% inclusionary to 10% because, that was passed at a point where we had really low interest rates, the economy was doing better, and so perhaps that those would work, numbers would work. And I've never been a fan of that idea, especially because of what you were saying, Sid, which is that, we want as many affordable units as we can get, right? And so the question is okay, so you kind of have a math problem here, right? Like the financing maybe is not penciling as the exact number where we are right now. How can you make that work? Well, you have other options, which is that you can just pay for it directly to the budget or to the Affordable Housing Trust. I think that's also, again, hard, right? Because you're competing against other housing initiatives. My preferred outcome is to do a tax abatement, right? Basically what that means is you take an empty lot, for example, right? There's been a couple of developments have an empty lot. Maybe their taxes right now are, I'm making these numbers out, right? So are $100,000 a year, right? And if you did build a housing development there, they would have $200,000. So when you get nothing there, you get $100,000 in taxes. If something is built, you would get $200,000. So you can take that delta, that $100,000, and say, we will give you that to subsidize the inclusionary. But what's beautiful about this approach is if the building didn't get built, you would not debt this money. So it's money you only get if the building is built. And then you could set an expiration date in 10 or 15 years, and then you get that full tax rate. It's how Jersey City. It's how a lot of places build housing, including Somerville. A lot of Somerville inclusionary 20% is penciling in places where the tax abatement. And I think it comes at a very little financial cost to us.
Another topic, we see as the potential risks and benefits of possible reforms to the Historical Commission and neighborhood conservation districts.
Yeah, that's a big question. To all the zoning work I've done, I never touched the conservation of historical districts, right, myself. And that's because we are a historic city. There's lots of beauty in the city, lots of things that go back to pre-Civil War, pre the founding of this country. I think that what people are seeing is that the historic conservation districts kind of served as a body that it sometimes pseudo-served to block development, not because of historical aspects, but because people want to more housing. 17 Story Street is a historical preservation project that is adding building house, but is preserving the main development itself. And the Historical Commission was really slowing it down. So I do think that we need to revisit it.
So you stated in your question and response that preservation decisions should be based on verifiable and thoughtful criteria on the well-being of the communities. Can you expand some more on what those criteria might be?
I think the fact that we have we've been saying, look, it's 50 years they're older, we're going to always subject housing to a review, you deem it significant or not. I think inherent in that is we have to reform that aspect up. And I think looking at, other criteria beyond, I think that's very kind of the way, and I get that there's an own history. I think sometimes we do a great job of that, but I think the most are things can be arbitrary and it can lead to personal preference and very discretionary. There's various examples of that. I think we can look at the historical registrar for helping us with this criteria. I don't have extreme specifics. I think we'd have to kind of do some brainstorming around that and to see where we can get through.
Thank you. But you mentioned also that building housing, you and other candidates have all mentioned this, on city-owned lots, in Central Square is important. That possibility has been on the table for some time now. What will it take to actually get it to happen in the next council term?
I think we really have to think about funding. I think we have to think about why is it hard to build affordable housing. I think if they take affordable housing finance 101, that there's so many subsidies that are involved. And it's not just the city, right? It's not just the state. It's the federal government. So looking at the challenges that we have ahead, it's going to be very challenging. I think we will be we'll be seeing support or zoning coming online, right? As you mentioned, and the AG thing, but Central Square is, I think, coming right after that, and making sure that we are working with our affordable housing developers on how can we actually help them build, because the funding is a big part of this. And funding ideas, we mentioned some of that, but permit fees, right? What else can we do to help developers make it more feasible and cancel out? But it's just very, very hard to build housing, and especially for us.
So you alluded to, or mentioned the square quarters rezoning at Central Square. Given that these will all be on the agenda for the next council, tell us a little bit more your thought process and how you would approach those.
It's actually coming to us this term. We'll be talking about corridor zoning, and I think part of that, what's important, is to look at what we have done with the planning states, right? What has been looking at it? I think there are some areas that we will recommend going additionally higher. I think you have to keep in mind mixed use, mixed retail, and mixed development. I think a lot of people don't want anything. Retail is really important. How can we have both? And thinking about it, book rating got a little, insight into that zoning. I think we want eye reviews, right? We want people to be, go into these businesses, but we should be intentional about, about some of that. So I think overall the approach will be to respect some of the planning processes that have gone underway with more of the Mass Ave, 10 Cambridge Street. And then I think there will be recommendations to some areas, I think, whether that's the Cambridge Prospect, Hampshire, maybe going further up. And your Leishner also going forward up.
Okay, so in the last couple seconds this year, you quoted your response Brookings Institution. You can't beat the climate crisis without rethinking land use to expand on what that is to.
Yeah, I think these issues go hand in hand, and I think sometimes when you get into conversations around trade-offs, I think I'd be less building more housing, and we know this. Infill development helps our efforts, and there are so many examples, whether that's we built to pass the COD standards, to other ways that we can also do it. It's important.
I think you wrote about your questionnaire, your story about your $800 room in East Cambridge will resonate with a lot of renters. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you would try to do to tackle Cambridge's rents, which are sadly among the highest in the United States?
Sure. So my entrance into Cambridge was that I needed to be close to one of my first jobs. And so the most affordable option was that I stayed in a room and I shared a house with 9 people who similarly needed a place to stay and did not have a lot of cash. And so that was my entrance into this city. And it was not big, but it was such opportunity. And I appreciated that so much. And I do think one of the benefits of the recent update to zoning is that there is no minimum lot size for a given unit, right? And I think that's important, very important, because that doesn't mean anybody is getting forced into a room. But what it does do is it provides freedom to live like that if you want to. And I think that similarly, people should have to not drive a car. Everyone should be able to use a car. But what shouldn't happen is you shouldn't be forced into a situation where you need to be a super commuter or even just a normal commuter if you don't want that. And so I think that policy and zoning is all about giving people choices and opening doors to the possibility that they can live affordably, they can live sustainably if they want, and not force them to live in a giant place that they really don't want to. And so there are any things to keep rents down. I do think that one of the most important ones is adding negotiating power to renters. And that is power. And so when you add some more units in the city, that's more units that really anybody can take. People who are at the top of the market, they can probably outbid everybody else, no matter what a housing looks like, to be perfectly honest. I'd rather have options as a renter.
Thank you. You also wrote that you support seeking to legalize mid-rise single-stair housing in Massachusetts. Can you tell us what that means and why you support it?
Sure. This is a state issue, so it's something that we would have to advocate for at the state level. But what it is right now, developers are restricted to providing 2 stairwells for in-sized buildings, meaning which be 4 and 6 stories. And this was created as a law back at a time when building materials and the environment were very different. And it was for many different considerations now that are moved. And so there has been research on this that essentially found it has considerable cost to building these types of really missing middle housing that doesn't really yield any benefits. It's no safer to have this one stairwell at all. You know, it's very popular in Europe and in many other places in the world in Spain. So this is just one restriction that I believe should be.
Thank you. In your view, how does Cambridge balance the trade-off between historic preservation and the need to build more housing?
But I think this gets to the heart of what public policy is, which is trade-offs. You can't have everything. You can't preserve every building more than 15 years old, for example. And so I think as someone designing, making policy, you have to listen to the community. Every single election for many, many years has yielded strong, the highest priority is housing affordability. We need to listen to that as a priority and really balance it appropriately against other factors.
So in your response, you stated that your priorities for squares and corridor rezoning would be to identify those squares and corridors with the highest likelihood of attracting affordable and middle market rate developer housing proposals and focus on supporting those projects. What criteria would you use to identify those areas with the highest images?
Part
part of the real issue here in Cambridge is that there isn't a housing needs study that it. Part of the problem here in Cambridge is that we keep trying to create more housing, but we don't even know what kind of housing we need. There hasn't been a housing needs study to figure out purely what residents here need, what levels are appropriate for that. And so what we need to do is figure out what people need and then figure out where those most likely places are that provide the amenities and conveniences, the transportation, the infrastructure, including water and sewer and all of those things, and open space. We're just shooting dark here by assuming that we need to build 18-story towers. We don't know if that's really the case. Is that what people want at Central Square? There's a lot of other problems in Central Square before you worry about building an 18-story building. So my concern is that we haven't done adequate research and understand what the real housing needs are. The other part of it is that we need to really take a look at studies we already have, but also studies that have been done, and we can bring in some studies that will give us an idea of what the most effective way is for us to build this housing. We pass these laws, we don't set specific goals, and yet we expect developers and financiers to come in and build the housing we want. Why? We haven't held the government, responsible at home for building units that have costs.
In your intro, you talked about your previous public service in other community and how you used that role to help build more housing or encourage more housing people. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that would apply to serving on the Cambridge City Council?
All right. Well, mainly it was that we developed the housing trust. That is a year-round market rate housing trust. It was the first in the Commonwealth. And what we did is we were able to buy properties, and we were also able to fund with partners the development of properties that were specifically targeted into residents of Provincetown and people who work there. That's the other thing that Cambridge is missing. We have preferences, okay? But we don't have money set aside that we specifically target to people who are living here already and working here. And the housing trust is a very important way to do that. The other kinds of things are that we have entered into public-private partnerships with developers who are doing mixed income housing. Not everybody needs to live in our monolithic housing projects. You can have mixed housing. And it may involve people having more relationships and interactions and opportunities to get to know people in other circumstances.
Thank you. Also, you mentioned in your intro, you alluded to the Ambition Cambridge goal to 12,500 units in Cambridge. Do you think that is the right goal?
I had no idea. And have we done a housing study? Envision was done in 2019. That is a very long time, really. In this city, it's a very long time. My concern is that we need to really update our vision about what's happening here. We can't do that without data. We have to know what people's real needs are. And yes, it's going to be tough to make those funding decisions because we're not going to have all the money we've had in the past. And so we are going to have to understand what we need to do. And when we pass laws, we need to make sure that we have goals, that we have specific targets, and that we ask government to reach.
Then finally, in your view, how should Cambridge balance the trade-off between historic preservation and the need to build more homes?
I think that will take some additional study. But the fact is that right now, without any guidelines for these neighborhoods and for these buildings, the Historic District Commission and the conservation districts are put in the position of puddling all the political rancor about what these buildings are and where they ought to be preserved. And that is just not fair. The Historic District Commissions have specific guidelines in most communities, and somehow or other, our Historic District Commission has been put in place of being the policeman for all of these projects.
Thank you. Thank you, man. So in your response, you characterize zoning rules before the multifamily laws and reforms as incentivizing affordable triple-deckers to be torn down or replaced with larger and expensive single-unit homes. how will the multifamily housing reforms change these incentives?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always use the triple decker that I live in as an example. It's in Cambridgeport, and even though you could technically build multifamily housing in Cambridgeport because of the setback requirements, because of the lot size requirements, what you saw is older triple deckers like the one I lived in being torn down and replaced by multi-million-dollar and large single-family homes because it was just impossible. If the building I lived in caught fire or just the owner decided they were going to tear it down for some reason, it would have been really hard to build a building the same size. We always talk about some of the setback requirements. I can reach out and touch the building beside me if I open my window. If you wanted to replace that, you couldn't have been able to do that. And so what you were seeing were these older, more affordable triple deckers maybe torn down and replaced by these massive single unit homes that way for $2, $3, $4 million. And so by allowing triple deckers, by allowing multifamily housing, we're going to see fewer conversion down to roofings, losing triple deckers and seeing them replaced by large single-family homes.
Thanks. So, if you're reelected to council in next term, we'll continue the conversation around rezoning the squares and corridors with the Central Square, North Mass Ave, Cambridge Street. Can you tell us how you would approach that and what would be your top priorities in Moderator?
Yeah, I think a big piece is increasing housing and increasing housing affordability. Especially on the corridors, we think of right now Order Square, where you have a G-stop, and then right next to it, you have a massive parking lot and a strip mall style stores. If you were designing a city today, that is the thing you would be designing, all the places we can have more housing. That is a great area we should be thinking about, as well as the corridor from Order Square out towards Arlington, right? If you think about that stretch of Mass Ave, it's a lot of single-story, two-story. That would be a great place for additional housing. It's great. There's a bus line. There are multiple red line stops. We should absolutely be thinking about more housing there. And I'm also interested in thinking about new approaches. Right now, we have a 20% affordability requirement for inclusionary zoning, and then we have an affordable housing overlay that's 100% affordability. Others talking about social housing. One thing I'm excited about thinking about is a social housing overlay, where you have maybe 80% affordable housing, 20% market rate, and you can get a lot more affordable housing on the corridors by allowing something like that. So it's something I'm also really interested in exploring.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned social housing because I think the supporter of it actually came up for a few candidates in the previous panel. How would Cambridge pay for that?
Yeah, I think they part through our affordable housing trust. I have led work on the council along with other folks, including Councilor Azeem Siddiqui, to increase the weightage fee. New corporate development, you have so much of in Kendall Square and Alewife, and even with the downturn, we're seeing a new Health Week development. We saw a new biomed project this term. That is something that should be contributing to our affordable housing trust fund to fund both 100% affordable housing as well as social housing. And the exciting thing about social housing is there is no profit in this, and the money is not going to investors. It is going to maintain and keep the affordable housing. The market rate housing, the market rate component of that, is not going to line the pockets of anyone. It's going to create more affordable housing, help more upkeep, have more green spaces, have more community spaces in those affordable housing. It's a super common model in Europe. We see it in Montgomery County in Maryland. We don't have social housing area in the U.S., and if any place can start it, it's Cambridge. There's funding in the state bill that one of our state reps, Mike Connolly, worked to get in there. We should be taking advantage of that, exploring that right here at Cambridge.
So final question then is, like about some other candidates, how should Cambridge balance the trade-off between historic preservation and the need to build more homes?
Yeah, I really don't see these two things in opposition to each other. I've been planning about that with Councilor Siddiqui and a couple other councilors about the Harriet Jacobs House. That is an opportunity we have to take a building that was home to a famous abolitionist that is falling apart and increase the access and improve the building, improve public access to it, which there's very little of right now, by adding housing into that. That is a case where we can advance historical preservation and advance housing at the same time. These things don't have to be in opposition one another.
Indeed. You on this current council term were the only vote against the multifamily housing reform. Can you explain how you found yourself in such a minority vote?
I can't explain why I was in such a minority, but I could tell you why I need that
I made that vote because I didn't think Burnhouse would result in the production of a toilet faucet.
Louder.
I felt that it would mostly produce luxury units, and that is what we seem to make. Of course, we haven't seen a lot of peanuts produced yet, as it was only cast in February 10th. But that's my concern. I also was concerned because I felt that it incentivized development in our neighborhood, which was like running straight, was completely contrary to Envision Cambridge and its recommendations.
And we spent 3 years developing a plan for the city of Envision Cambridge. 5,000 people were engaged in that study. And that study said to put growth along the corridors, in the squares, and in transition districts, which are generally 1 to 2 story industrial buildings and parking lots, often in the edges of neighborhoods. So I felt like it was problematic focusing on development in the neighborhoods. And then finally, I felt that the hazard right entitlement of the multifamily housing ordinance also was really brutal to abutters. Abutters are finding, if you've been listening to the Cambridge Historical Commission meetings lately, I will tell you they are a source of great trauma. They really are worth tuning into. Neighbors are losing their light. They are losing their gardens. They worry about losing trees. Their solar panels are going to be shaded. And they're losing their privacy. And they have absolutely no recourse. And again, brutal is the word that I think really defines this workweeks. There are gooder ways to build more housing than the multifamily housing plans.
Thank you. You mentioned Envision, the plan. So one question I asked Louise, that plan does state a goal of 12,500 units. Do you support that goal?
On the previous weeks, I've been asking I could share a pretty long-term planning with Jivan and I work with Sumbul and Burhan Azeem for the housing. Louder. Oh, okay. I've been trying to get a meeting on the calendar to talk about our goals. I think we really have to be assessing who lives in our affordable housing. Who do we want to live in our affordable housing? How large do you want the city to grow? I briefed Louise in 2019 but Cambridge was a very different city. It was before Trump's assault on Cambridge. It was before I worry that, we're going to be losing federal funds and be losing state funds. Our universities are impacted. Our student populations are impacted. Our research institutions are impacted. Our biotech has taken in debt. So I think the demand for housing may have changed since 2019. And I think we need to have a meeting where we're really considering what our goals should be and what is necessary going forward. And then we should plan for those numbers for that.
It do. In the question on the questionnaire around how Cambridge should more effectively govern itself, you said that I would encourage city staff to listen more closely to its informed and often longtime homeowners and neighborhood groups and not be bullied fully by organized groups mostly made up of transient residents. Do you believe that renters and fewer residents don't count as much as long-term residents?
No, I knew it was this called
This sick displayed it. I just couldn't take it anymore when I'm right. That why. I want you to know this.
What do you say?
30 seconds. It was a renter once. I worked at the Museum of Fine Arts as a research assistant. I made 17,000, and I understand why renters would want to live in this incredible community. So I definitely understand the need to build more housing and the need for young people to be able to live in a little city. I also understand the need for families to live in the city and city workers to be able to live in the city. So I'm in it to help you to solve this hard. I guess this is it.
Thank you. I appreciate candidates. I do see that Mayor Simmons has arrived, and we're figuring out things. Yeah, come on in.
Or do we? I don't. Justin. Minute and a half intro, and
I'm going to flip the script. Go for it. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. First of all, I want to thank ABC for doing this forum on housing is an extraordinary important issue in our community. But also what is important, as we all know, we're living into very dark times right now. And unfortunately, those dark times are getting closer and closer to our front door. And so as I was preparing to come over here, I got a call by the situation with one of my families. It's a dire situation. So I apologize for being late, not being here, and not being able to stay. A family that has been ensnared in a fast-evolving situation with ICE was placed in contact with my office just recently, this evening, and just before the forum started, so that's why I was not here. I have met the city manager in, I will be moving in the city council, and city solicitor in the multi-service center, and de novo, and we are actively working to assist this family, because this is a very dire situation. If you don't act fast, I think one of the parents will be disappeared. I'm not going to release the family's information at this time. I don't think that will be helpful. It might be detrimental. I am going to ask that you give us space to work with this family, hold it as tightly as you can. And if you're not hearing information coming from City Hall about this, consider the information to be incomplete. Because one thing you don't want is rumors spreading and false information and people reacting or becoming more fearful than we already are. So, as Cambridge always does, we will stand in solidarity. We're working as hard as we can, as fast as we can. We literally have a 2-day deadline to do so. So again, my apologies. It's very good to see you. To my colleagues, I apologize. I'm going to take my leave.